Your daddy bought you that tab, sweetheart. We all know you didn't earn shit." The words came from Sergeant First Class Kyle Brennan, spat across the briefing room at Fort Liberty like poison, his face twisted with contempt. 23 Special Forces soldiers watched as Captain Lennox Reeve, 28 years old Ranger, Tab, daughter of the legendary General Marcus Reeve, stood silent at the front of the room. Brennan thought he knew her story. Thought she was just another legacy kid riding her father's name. He had no idea that the woman standing in front of him had a classified, after-action report from Syria where she'd held a bridge alone for 40 minutes under enemy fire, or that the scar running along her left forearm wasn't from a training accident. It was from holding pressure on a dying teammate's neck wound while rounds snapped past her head, and dismissing her as daddy's little girl was about to destroy his career in front of the entire battalion. Fort Liberty, North Carolina. The Special Warfare Center compound sat deep in the pine woods, a sprawl of tan buildings and ranges where Green Berets trained and where reputations were built or shattered. The briefing room on the second floor of Building 3 smelled like burned coffee and floor wax, with harsh fluorescent lights and a wall covered in unit patches going back 4 decades. Captain Lennox Reeve stood near the podium with her hands clasped behind her back, eyes forward. She was 28, 5'9", with dark hair pulled into a regulation bun and the kind of lean, hardened build that came from years of rucking under load. She wore operational camouflage pattern fatigues with her Ranger tab sewn above her unit patch, her captain's bars polished. Her boots shined, nothing about her invited conversation, nothing about her suggested weakness. She'd been assigned to 3rd Special Forces Group 8 weeks ago as a plans officer, a staff position coordinating between conventional Army units and special operations. The role existed on paper to improve interoperability. In reality, it meant proving every day that she belonged in a building full of men who didn't want her there. Before you find out what happened next, drop your city or country in the comments, and if these stories matter to you, hit subscribe. Her father was General Marcus Reeve, 2 silver stars, 3 bronze stars with valor, 32 years in special operations including 2 years commanding JSOC. He'd retired 18 months ago and moved to Montana, and his shadow covered everything Lennox touched. The men assumed she'd been handed everything, assumed her Ranger tab came easy because of who her father was, assumed she'd never faced real combat. They were wrong on every count. Sergeant First Class Kyle Brennan sat in the front row, arms crossed, jaw clenched. He was 31 with 12 years in Special Forces, 3 combat rotations, and a deep well of bitterness about being passed over for Master Sergeant twice. He blamed politics, blamed the Army lowering standards, blamed people like Lennox taking opportunities from real soldiers. Next to him sat Sergeant First Class David Ortega, quieter but equally skeptical. Behind them, 21 other Green Berets watched and waited. The briefing was routine, a mission planning session for a field training exercise at Camp Mackhall. Lennox was presenting the logistics annex, until Brennan decided it wasn't. Lennox Reeve grew up on Army posts, Fort Campbell, Fort Benning, Fort Lewis. Her father commanded at every level from company to task force, and he was gone more than he was home. When he was home, he carried a silence that filled rooms, the kind that came from seeing things you couldn't talk about and making decisions that cost lives. Her mother left when Lennox was 9. Walked out one morning while her father was deployed to Iraq, leaving a note that said she couldn't be married to the job anymore. Lennox found the note on the kitchen counter and sat there until her father's executive officer showed up 6 hours later to check on her. When her father came home 3 weeks later on emergency leave, he read the note once, folded it, and asked Lennox if she was okay. She said yes. They never spoke about it again. But something changed in her that day. She understood that some people couldn't carry the weight, that her father carried something most people would break under, and she decided, without saying it out loud, that she wouldn't be someone who walked away. She joined ROTC at UNC Chapel Hill. Commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant at 22, went straight to infantry basic officer leader course, then volunteered for Ranger School when women were first allowed to attend. Ranger School was 9 weeks of designed misery. She was one of 2 women in her class. The other quit during the Derby phase. Lennox recycled twice, once in the mountain phase when she failed a patrol leadership evaluation, and once in the Florida phase when she couldn't complete a land navigation course in time after going 48 hours without sleep. Both times she was offered the option to withdraw with honor. Both times she refused. When she finally graduated and pinned the tab on her shoulder, her father flew in for the ceremony. He shook her hand, looked her in the eye, and said, "You earned it." Nothing else, but it was enough. Her first deployment was Syria, attached to a CJSF, Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force, hunting ISIS remnants in the Euphrates River Valley. She was a platoon leader with the 82nd Airborne, but her unit was supporting a clearing operation led by Special Forces and SEAL elements. The operation went sideways on the 3rd day. Her platoon was providing security on a bridge outside Al-Hasaka, while the task force hit a compound 2 kilometers south. Intel said the compound was a weapons. Intel was wrong. It was a command node with fighters and a tunnel system that opened 200 meters from Lennox's position. 20 fighters came up out of the ground at sunset, hit Lennox's position from the rear, killed 2 of her soldiers, Specialist Anthony Brooks and Private First Class Maria Salazar, in the first 30 seconds. The rest of her platoon fell back under fire. The task force was pinned down at the compound. Air support was 15 minutes out. The bridge was the only viable medevac route. Lennox stayed. She took cover behind a concrete barrier with her M4 6 magazines and 2 soldiers who refused to leave her. Sergeant First Class Aaron Vickers and Specialist Jenna Cole. They held that bridge for 38 minutes while her platoon regrouped and the task force extracted wounded, including a SEAL who'd taken shrapnel to the legs. Lennox took a grenade fragment to the left forearm that carved through muscle and nicked bone. She held pressure on Brooks's neck wound with her other hand until he stopped breathing, then kept firing. Dropped 9 confirmed kills before an Apache arrived and shredded the tunnel entrance. When the medevac landed, she walked onto the bird, got 22 stitches at the Combat Support Hospital, refused evacuation to Germany, stayed with her platoon. The after-action report was classified. The Bronze Star with Valor citation was classified. Everything about that night disappeared into a file that required clearances most soldiers would never have. So when Lennox showed up at Fort Liberty with a Ranger tab and her father's last name, nobody knew what she'd done. They just saw a legacy officer and assumed she'd been handed her career. She didn't correct them. She'd learned that explanations didn't matter, only actions did. The briefing started at 0900. Lennox stood at the podium with a tactical map of Camp Macol projected behind her. She'd spent 4 days building the logistics plan. Supply routes, cache points, medevac positions, communications relays. It was solid work. She made it through 3 slides before Brennan interrupted. Mom, question. Who reviewed this plan before you presented it? Lennox looked at him. I built it myself, Sergeant. I've reviewed it against doctrine and terrain analysis. Brennan leaned back in his chair. Right. And how much ground time you got running field ops with SF, ma'am? Because this looks like something a butter bar fresh out of BULC would put together. The room shifted. Soldiers glanced at each other. Ortega muttered something under his breath. Lennox kept her voice level. If you have specific concerns about the plan, Sergeant, I'm happy to address them. Brennan stood, walked to the front of the room, stopped 3 feet from her with his arms crossed. Here's my concern, ma'am. Your daddy bought you that tab, sweetheart. We all know you didn't earn shit. And now you're standing here trying to tell Green Berets how to run an operation when you've probably never been in a real gunfight. So why don't you step aside and let someone who actually knows what they're doing take over? The room exploded. Voices overlapping. Some soldiers telling Brennan to shut his mouth, others murmuring agreement. Ortega stood and told Brennan he was way out of line. Brennan ignored him, staring at Lennox with open contempt. Lennox didn't move, didn't raise her voice. She looked at Brennan with cold, flat eyes. Sergeant Brennan, you are out of line, sit down. Now Brennan laughed, turned to the room like he was performing. Or what, ma'am? You gonna call Daddy? Tell him the mean NCOs hurt your feelings. Before Lennox could respond, the door opened. Colonel Raymond Hale walked in, and every soldier in the room snapped to attention. Hale was the battalion commander, 52 years old, gray hair, 29 years in Special Forces. He'd been standing outside the door, he'd heard everything, at ease. Sit. Everyone sat except Brennan, who stood frozen at the front of the room looking like he'd just realized he'd stepped on a landmine. Hale walked to the front, looked at Brennan for 5 long seconds, then spoke, his voice quiet and cold. Sergeant First Class Brennan, you just publicly questioned a superior officer's competence and integrity. You used disrespectful language toward a captain in front of subordinates. That's Article 89, disrespect toward a superior commissioned officer. Do you understand the severity of what you just did? Brennan's face went pale, sir. I. Hale held up a hand. Captain Reeve, finish your briefing. Lennox picked up the laser pointer, finished the presentation, nobody interrupted. When she was done, Hale dismissed everyone except Brennan, Ortega, and Lennox. The door closed. Hale looked at Brennan. You want to know who Captain Reeve is, Sergeant? Let me tell you. She held a bridge in Syria for 38 minutes against 20 enemy fighters. She took shrapnel and kept fighting. She enabled the extraction of wounded personnel, including a SEAL, who would have blowed out without that bridge. She has a Bronze Star with Valor that's classified because the operation details are classified, and she earned her Ranger tab by completing the full course with 2 recycles and no special consideration. Hale's voice dropped even lower. She's forgotten more about tactical operations than you've learned in 12 years. And you just disrespected her in front of the entire battalion. He looked at Lennox. Ma'am, you have the authority to prefer charges under Article 89. Do you wish to proceed? Lennox looked at Brennan. His hands were shaking. His jaw trembled. She thought about what her father would do. Thought about Brooks dying on that bridge. Thought about what leadership actually meant. "No, sir, I don't." Hale nodded slowly. "Sergeant Brennan, you're removed from the training cycle effective immediately. Report to the battalion sergeant major. You'll receive a written reprimand in your permanent file. If you ever speak to an officer like that again, you'll be looking at a court-martial. Get out." Brennan left. The door closed behind him. Hale looked at Lennox. "You showed restraint, Captain. That's good leadership. But don't let it happen again. You have authority. Use it. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Hale walked out. Lennox stood alone, staring at the empty briefing room. She thought she'd feel vindicated. She just felt tired. That night Lennox sat in her off-post apartment, a generic one-bedroom with beige walls and rental furniture. She had a beer she wasn't drinking and her phone on the table. Her father's contact pulled up on the screen. She hadn't called him since he retired. Told herself it was because he'd earned his peace. Because he didn't need her problems added to whatever weight he still carried. But the truth was simpler. She didn't know how to talk to him anymore. Didn't know if he saw her as his daughter or just another soldier trying to live up to a name that was too heavy. Her left arm ached. The scar where the grenade fragment had torn through, a jagged white line running from her wrist halfway to her elbow, always hurt when she was stressed. She rubbed it without thinking. Staring at the phone, she thought about Brooks. About holding his neck while his blood pulsed between her fingers. About the way his eyes had stayed focused on hers until they didn't. About his mother's letter 6 months later saying she didn't blame her, that Anthony had died doing what he wanted to do. Lennox kept that letter in her assault pack. Read it sometimes when the weight got too much. She set the phone down without calling. Drank half the beer, went to bed and didn't sleep. The training exercise started 6 days later. 36 soldiers from 3rd Group split into 6 teams, conducting a simulated direct action mission at Camp Mackle. Lennox was running coordination from a tactical operations center 2 kilometers from the objective. The exercise was supposed to last 72 hours. It lasted 36. On the second night, one of the teams, Ortega's team, the one Brennan had been removed from, hit a navigation error. They were supposed to approach from the north. They came in from the east through a ravine that showed on maps as a dry creek bed, but was actually 15 feet deep with loose shale and deadfall timber. Halfway through, the point man, Sergeant First Class Mason Torres, lost footing on wet rocks and fell. The sound of his left femur snapping carried through the trees like a rifle shot. The team called it in. Medevac was 30 minutes out. The ravine was too narrow for hoist extraction. They'd have to carry Torres out on a litter, and the climb was steep enough that they'd need every hand. Lennox was in the Tausi when the call came. She grabbed her aid bag, her radio, and her ruck. Told the operations NCO she was going to the site. "Mom, you don't need to." "I'm going." She covered 2 kilometers in 18 minutes, hit the ravine, and found 6 soldiers clustered around Torres. He was sheet white, drenched in sweat, his leg bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. The team's 18D medic, Staff Sergeant Colin Briggs, had started an IV, applied a traction splint, and was monitoring vitals. Lennox knelt next to him. "How long till he decompensates?" "Systolics dropping. Maybe 10 minutes before shock sets in hard." She looked at the ravine, at the litter, at the 6 soldiers. "We carry him out. Now, Torres, you still with me?" Torres nodded, his teeth chattering. "Good, we're getting you out of here. Ortega, your point. I'll take rear. Everyone else on the litter rails. Let's move." They moved. The climb was brutal. 200 pounds of soldier plus litter plus gear on a 40-degree slope covered in loose rock. Twice the litter nearly slipped. Both times Lennox caught the rear rail and stabilized it, her shoulders screaming, her lungs burning. Ortega led them up, calling out handholds and footholds. Briggs stayed next to Torres, monitoring his airway and IV. The other 4 soldiers rotated on the rails every 50 meters. 24 minutes later they reached the top. The medevac was landing in a clearing 100 meters away. They ran the litter across open ground and loaded Torres onto the bird. Vitals stable. He was going to make it. Ortega stood next to Lennox, both of them covered in mud and sweat. "Ma'am, that was—" "Thank you." Lennox shook her head. "Just doing my job, Sergeant." But word spread. By morning, every soldier in 3rd Group knew the captain had run 2 clicks in full kit, climbed into a ravine and helped carry a 200-pound green beret out of a hole. Brennan heard about it in the battalion headquarters where he'd been reassigned to staff duty. He showed up at the tea house the next afternoon while Lennox was reviewing comma logs. His face was pale, his hands shaking. "Ma'am, I need to apologize." Lennox looked up from the paperwork. "Go ahead, I was wrong. About everything. I was angry about my career and I took it out on you. I said things that were disrespectful and unprofessional. You didn't deserve that." Lennox studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Apology accepted, Sergeant. But understand something. I don't need your approval. I don't need anyone's. I know what I've done. I know what I'm capable of. and I'll keep doing my job whether you believe in me or not." Brennan nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I understand." He left. And for the first time since arriving at Fort Liberty, Lennox felt like maybe she'd earned something that was hers alone. Not her father's legacy, just hers. 3 weeks. Third Group hosted a joint training demonstration for a SEAL detachment visiting from Dam Neck. 62 SEALs and support personnel observing SF close quarters battle techniques in the shoot house. The demo was part of an interoperability initiative, and Lennox was running the safety brief and coordination. The briefing room was packed. SEALs in the back rows, Green Berets up front. Lennox stood at the podium and walked through safety protocols, range procedures, emergency actions. Professional, concise. When she finished, a Navy commander in the back row, a SEAL troop commander named Briggs, raised his hand. "Captain Reeve, I've been reading after-action reports from Syria. I understand you held a bridge under fire to enable extraction of wounded personnel, including one of our guys. Is that accurate?" The room went dead silent. Every eye turned to Lennox. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir, that's accurate." Briggs stood. "On behalf of Naval Special Warfare, thank you. You saved one of ours, that matters." The room broke into applause. Green Berets, SEALs, everyone. Brennan was standing near the door. He didn't applaud at first, just watched. Then slowly, he brought his hands together. After the briefing, he approached Lennox in the hallway. Extended his hand. "Ma'am, I was wrong about you." "Completely wrong. You've earned your place here." She shook his hand. "Thanks, Sergeant." He nodded and walked away. 4 months later, Lennox received orders to JSOC headquarters at Fort Liberty as a special operations planner. She left Third Group with a letter of recommendation from Colonel Hale and the quiet respect of soldiers who'd watched her prove herself. Brennan stayed at Third Group. Made Master Sergeant 8 months later. Became one of the battalion's most effective team sergeants. Torres recovered and returned to full duty after 6 months of physical therapy. The night before Lennox left for her new assignment, she called her father. He answered on the first ring. They talked for an hour, about Syria, about the bridge, about carrying weight and making decisions and what it meant to lead. He told her he was proud. Told her she'd become the officer he'd always hoped she'd be, not because of his name but in spite of it. When she hung up, she felt lighter than she had in years. The mission continued.